There's a small office in Osaka where a disagreement between two coworkers unfolded last month. The kind of disagreement that in most offices ends in raised voices, cold emails, or someone quitting on the spot. Instead, within 20 minutes, both people were nodding, both people felt heard, and both people walked back to their desks having actually resolved something. Neither of them raised their voice. Neither of them said the word wrong a single time. Meanwhile, somewhere else right now, two people are locked in a conversation that started as a small disagreement and is quickly becoming something neither of them can walk back from. Each one waiting for the other to stop talking just so they can say what they've already decided to say. Same basic situation, completely different outcome. What if the difference between these two conversations has almost nothing to do with the issue being discussed, and almost everything to do with 7 quiet communication habits? Each one so understated it barely looks like a technique at all. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what those 7 habits are and why they can make your next difficult conversation noticeably easier, starting with the very next one you have. Before we walk through the habits themselves, we need to address an assumption almost everyone carries into a hard conversation. The assumption is this: the way to win a disagreement is to make your point clearly and forcefully enough that the other person has no choice but to agree. This feels intuitive, but it consistently backfires because the moment someone feels cornered by an argument, their priority shifts from understanding to defending. The actual goal of a difficult conversation isn't to be the most convincing voice in the room, it's to lower the other person's defenses enough that they can actually hear what you're saying. This is the piece almost every communication framework quietly skips, the real Japanese term Aizuchi. The small verbal and physical signals, a nod, a soft a brief I see, given continuously while someone else is speaking, to show they are actively being followed rather than merely waited out. The practice: instead of staying silent while formulating a rebuttal, the listener offers small, frequent signals of engagement throughout the other person's sentence, never interrupting, but never appearing checked out either. The scientific validation: communication researchers have found that these micro signals of active listening measurably lower a speaker's stress response mid-sentence. Because the brain interprets silence during disagreement as a threat cue, while small acknowledgments are read as safety, allowing the speaker to finish their thought instead of escalating to be heard. The second habit concerns the gap between what is said and what is meant. The real Japanese term, honne and tatemae, the distinction between one's true feelings and the face presented in a given social context. The practice, rather than treating a diplomatic response as dishonest, it is understood as a form of respect. A way of leaving room for the other person to save face while the real issue is addressed more gently, often through indirect language rather than blunt confrontation. The scientific validation. Cross-cultural communication studies have shown that indirect phrasing during conflict reduces the listener's defensive response significantly compared to direct confrontation. Because indirectness signals that the relationship is being protected even while the disagreement is being raised. The third habit is about sensing the emotional climate of a room before speaking. The real Japanese term, kuuki wo yomu, literally to read the air. The practice: before delivering a difficult point, a brief pause is taken to notice tension, fatigue, or distraction in the other person, and the timing or tone of the message is adjusted accordingly, rather than delivered exactly as originally planned regardless of the moment. The scientific validation. Research on emotional attunement has found that messages delivered when a listener is already emotionally activated are processed far less accurately than the same messages delivered after a brief settling period. Meaning timing changes comprehension as much as wording does. The fourth habit involves deliberate restraint before responding. The real Japanese term, enryo, a respectful holding back, choosing not to say everything that could be said in a given moment. The practice: rather than voicing every reaction in real time, a portion of the response is consciously withheld, not out of avoidance, but out of a belief that not every true thought needs to be spoken in order to be honest. The scientific validation. Studies on conflict de-escalation have found that a short delay between impulse and response measurably reduces the emotional intensity of what is ultimately said. Because the initial spike of reactivity fades within seconds, leaving a calmer, more accurate statement in its place. The fifth habit takes place before the difficult conversation even begins. The real Japanese term, nemawashi, literally preparing the roots before transplanting. used to describe quietly laying groundwork with people individually before bringing a difficult topic into a group setting. The practice, rather than surprising someone with a hard conversation in front of others, or all at once, smaller informal conversations happen first, giving the other person time to absorb and consider before the formal discussion occurs. The scientific validation, organizational psychologists have found that people who receive information gradually with time to process respond with significantly less defensiveness than those who receive the same information abruptly and without warning, because sudden information triggers a threat response regardless of its content. The sixth habit concerns what gets prioritized when a conversation reaches its most tense point. The real Japanese term, wa harmony, specifically the preservation of the relationship as a value that sits alongside, not beneath, being right. The practice at the peak of disagreement. The question quietly asked is not only, how do I make my point, but how do I make my point without breaking the relationship that has to continue tomorrow? The scientific validation. Relationship researchers have found that couples and colleagues who explicitly value the relationship during conflict, rather than treating winning as the only goal, report resolving disagreements faster and returning to baseline trust more quickly afterward. The seventh and final habit is the simplest, and it often happens at the very start of a hard conversation, before anything difficult has even been said. The real Japanese term, sumimasen, an acknowledgement of inconvenience or disruption, often translated as excuse me or I'm sorry, used constantly as a social lubricant rather than an admission of fault. The practice, a conversation that might create discomfort, is opened by first acknowledging that discomfort directly. I know this might be an uncomfortable thing to bring up, rather than diving straight into the substance of the disagreement. The scientific validation. Negotiation researchers have found that briefly naming the discomfort of a conversation before having it lowers the listener's guardedness measurably, because it signals awareness and care rather than an ambush. As you've seen, making a difficult conversation easier has very little to do with being more persuasive or more articulate. It has to do with 7 quiet habits practiced before, during, and around the hardest moments of a conversation. Signal engagement continuously with Aizuchi. Leave room for face-saving honesty through honne and tatemae. Sense the room before speaking with kuuki wo yomu. Practice deliberate restraint through enryo. Lay the groundwork early with nemawashi. Protect the relationship alongside the point with wa, and open with acknowledgement through sumimasen. None of it requires abandoning your position. It requires making enough space for the other person to actually hear it. If this changed the way you think about your next hard conversation, please like this video and subscribe so we can continue unlocking this kind of practical Japanese wisdom together. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these 7 habits are you going to try in your next difficult conversation? Leave it in the comments below. Until the next video.